Welcome to the Big Rich Show. This podcast will focus on conversations with friends and acquaintances within the four-wheel drive industry. Many of the people that I will be interviewing, you may know the name, you may know some of the history, but let's get in depth with these people and find out what truly makes them a four-wheel drive enthusiast. So now's the time to sit back, grab a cold one, and enjoy our conversation.
Whether you're crawling the Red Rocks of Moab or hauling your toys to the trail, Maxxis has the tires you can trust for performance and durability. 4 wheels or 2. Maxxis tires are the choice of champions because they know that whether for work or play, for fun or competition, Maxxis tires deliver. Choose Maxxis. Tread victoriously.
Why should you read 4Low Magazine? Because 4Low Magazine is about your lifestyle, the four-wheel drive adventure lifestyle that we all enjoy. Rock crawling, trail riding, event coverage, vehicle builds, and do-it-yourself tech, all in a beautifully presented package. You won't find 4Low on the newsstand rack, so subscribe today and have it delivered to you. On today's episode of Conversations with Big Rich, we have Mike Shaffer. Mike Shaffer is one of the original OG ARCA rock crawling competitors. In fact, national championship at ARCA in the old Zuki. And then Mike competed at the first Cal Rocks event that I put on, which was Put Up or Shut Up in 2001. And I believe he actually won that event. So we'll talk to Mike about the early days of rock crawling, being a fabricator, a race car builder, racing in Baja, and a national competitor in rock crawling. So let's get started and talk to Mike. Mike, thank you for coming on board. So how have you been? How's the family?
Good. Everybody's doing good, even though we're in what seems like the middle of this pandemic. But yeah, everybody's been really good. Business has been good. So yeah, no complaints.
Great. Well, so where did you get started? Where did life start for Mike Shaffer? What state, what city, and what were some of the influences as you were growing up?
So I was born and raised in Livermore, California, in the Bay Area. My mom actually worked for a company doing composite work, fiberglass, carbon fiber, honeycomb work, so on. That company did a lot of road race cars, and they built fiberglass bodies and parts and whatnot. And then for a while, she worked for a company doing boats, and then she ended up getting a job with Al Unser Sr. on their Indy team.
Wow.
And actually did composite work for a little over a year, I think it was, on the Indy program. And then she moved back to California and then went back to work for the original company, CDP Products. And they made a lot of, this is where the off-road influence came from.
Okay.
They made a lot of fiberglass parts for John Dietz's old race Jeep. And then John Dietz got sponsored by Nissan, and they made parts for his Nissan program. And growing up, being around that, I was super, super intrigued by it. And I don't know why, but I never fell in love with the road race scene. You know, going to Sears Point, Laguna Seca a lot as a kid, but I just wasn't super in love with it. But the first time I got around anything to do with dirt, you know, I was hooked on it.
I think that a lot of us that are in this industry have come from that same kind of influence. You grew up in Livermore, California. For people that don't know, that's the East Bay across from San Francisco, south of Oakland. In high school, participate in any sports, or what was your thing there?
So I was kind of raised that if it didn't have a motor, it wasn't a sport. So
all right.
Actually, I was into dirt bikes when I was in high school, rode dirt bikes a fair amount. And then right out of high school, I built a little Baja Bug, ran that for a while. And then I went the opposite direction and started building a 66 El Camino as a drag car. And after I had the El Camino, and then I had a 71 Chevelle, and then a Chevy Nova, and That unfortunately, well, fortunately, it was a lot of street racing involved. And after getting arrested a lot for street racing, finally I had a judge tell me that if he seen me again, I was going to go to jail for a long time. So I literally had just built a 70 Camaro, and I sold the Camaro and bought a 77 Toyota Land Cruiser. And within, I think, a couple weeks, we were going to Rubicon.
Nice.
And that kind of started that whole going down that other path.
About what year was that?
Probably 2000, I mean, 94.
94. Okay.
Yeah.
Cool. I won't ask you what year you were born or how old you are. I know you're younger than I am. Just about everybody is younger than I am. But let's talk about those early days of rock crawling and being, with the Toyota. That surprised me when you said Toyota. I knew that you built the Zuki buggy, but we'll get to that in a minute. Let's talk about those early days on the Rubicon.
So yeah, I had a 77 Land Cruiser that we did an SM420 swap, granny box 4-speed swap, and then some cheap Lincoln, or not Lincoln lockers, but what were they? They were Lockrights lockers. And it's actually kind of funny because there's a lot of guys in the off-road industry that I met with that rig. I was up at Rubicon in the snow one year, and I broke a Birfield. And there was a family that I ran into that had a Birfield, and they literally teased me with it and told me they had it, showed it to me, and told me, nope, we're not selling it, we're not giving it to you, we're not loaning it to you. And they had a pinkish FJ40, and that was the Faber brothers. And it was my first time dealing with them. but yeah,
So
and then
you got back at them later on because you just whooped their butts at all the competitions.
Yeah, it was all good though. I mean, they weren't assholes about it or anything or whatnot, but they kind of just gave me a hard time about it. New kid at Rubicon, don't have any spares and so on. And then I ended up selling that rig and building an 85 4Runner that had a V6 in it and was fully caged and a bunch of other stuff. And then that rig, actually, another snow trip, we were up at Rubicon. It was super late in the, it had to be April or yeah, I think it was in April. And we went into Ellis Creek, and there was lots of snow up at Rubicon late in the year, and the snow was super, super deep. And we get to Ellis Creek, and we met Lance Clifford, and then Lance's ex-wife Kelly, and I think there was a couple other guys from Pirates of the Rubicon there. I think the technician was there, and a few other guys, but we hung out there for the weekend. And then on the way out, right at the spillway, my rig, big heavy 4Runner, broke through the ice right at the spillway where water was running under the snow, and basically fell through. And it was sitting on the rear bumper, and the front tires were on the hard pack ahead of it, but the rear tires were like, they had to be like 6 or 7 feet above the water running below.
Wow.
And Lance was in front of me, and I talked him into coming back, and he was driving Kelly's old Jeep, the CJ. And he probably winched on me for 2 hours to get me unstuck. And he was not happy. But yeah, he wasn't happy at all, but he helped me out, got me unstuck. And yeah, I willed that rig for a few more years and ended up selling it. And it's kind of funny story with that rig. I sold it to a guy, and then he rolled it, and then I bought it back, got it back off of him for next to nothing. And then I willed it a little bit and then sold it to someone else. And then I think I ended up with it back one other time. And but then I moved on and built the first little black Suzuki that I did my first rock crawling comps in. which was based off a Suzuki frame, but it had a coil suspension front and rear that we built at the shop, and the thing worked pretty well, and it was small and super lightweight.
So when did you start Shaffer's Off-Road?
August 1st of 1998.
Okay. And that you were located in the Livermore area at that time?
No, so in 96, I moved, 95, 96, I moved to Carson City, Nevada, kind of on a dare. I had a friend that wanted to move up there. And so we had went up there and kind of checked it out. And we were looking at Lake Tahoe, Carson, so on. I was poking around looking in a newspaper and seeing that a shop was hiring, and he dared me to call. And 2 weeks later, I was moving.
Wow.
Got the job and was moving up there. So I moved up there, and then I worked at that shop for a little bit, and then I got a job working for Carson City Dodge Chrysler, and worked there as a tech for a while, and then in 98 I opened the shop in Carson.
Okay. How did you decide to get into the comp scene? How did that all come about?
So I built this little black Suzuki. The first go round I built it with Suzuki axles, and it was it looked very very basic, but it was still, we had done a 3-link on the rear. The front was just sprung over, but it had, gears and transfer case, all the other good stuff. And then at Rubicon, we did, I think we were the second person to ever do crack line back in the day in Little Sluice. And Lance actually spotted me through it. And he was sitting there antagonizing people to do it, and nobody would try it. So I was like, screw it, I'll try it. And I did it one direction and then turned around and did it the other direction. And another buddy that was there with me tried it and broke his truck and whatnot. But so the next year, we had modified the Suzuki and changed the front clip to kind of an all tube front clip, and stretched the wheelbase a bunch and put Wagoneer Dana 44s in it. And we went to Moab for Easter Jeep Safari, and we were playing in some obstacle up off on Hell's Revenge, and I ran into this guy, Randy Ellis. And I knew Randy from the magazines, but that was as far as I knew him. And, I always liked the stuff he built. He always built kind of some wild, crazy stuff. And I thought it was pretty cool to be wheeling with those guys. And after wheeling with them for a little bit, Randy's like, he had asked if I had thought about doing any of the rock crawling comps. And I never really had. I mean, I'd watch back then. At that time, it was just the Warren Rock Crawling Championships. And, I talked to him a little bit about it and didn't really put much thought into it. And then there was an event in Johnson Valley. They used to do an event, I think like in October. So the Victor Valley Four Wheelers, they did a little rock crawling event. And so we did the little event. We got second place, and we weren't too far off of them. And I was like, I kind of thought about it a little bit more. And so the next Warren event that they had at Johnson Valley, we tried to actually enter. We couldn't get into it because the event was full. So we went down and watched it. And after that, I was kind of hooked. And the following year, the beginning of the following season, we signed up for the first ARCA event of the year. And at that event, I mean, there was probably 80 competitors, maybe 100 competitors. And it was our first event. And I remember there was one obstacle right off the start. It was like our first obstacle. And every single competitor in front of us, just like all day watching them go into this obstacle, rolled over on this one set of cones. And I'm like, why is everybody trying to get around this one cone that's only worth 10 points and they're getting 40 points because they're all friggin' rolling over? So I was like, screw it, we're just going to take the cone. And next thing you know, the end of the first day, we were like in second place. And we ended up ending the event in 6th place. And it was our first event ever. The next event we went to, I think the next event was like Las Cruces or something like that. That was a super fun event. It was the first time I seen Mike Palmer's old rig with that big sprint car motor.
Right.
And that thing was crazy, for the time. But I honestly super intimidated, competing against guys like Shannon and Palmer and all those guys back then. But it was the early days was so much fun. It was just so different than it's gone. It's just because it was new. There's lots of guys that were driving very basic rigs, and everybody was learning and building new cool stuff. But it was a lot of fun. We finished off that year, and I think we ended up like fifth or sixth for the season that year in that little Suzuki rig. And then at the end of the season, we took the rig apart. Let me back up. Right, the final that year was Farmington, and had the new rig done for Farmington. And basically, I just took all the running gear out of the Suzuki, built a tube chassis, and put coilovers on it. So it was super, super basic, just Wagoneer axles, Suzuki it was a Suzuki Esteem 1.8 with a sidekick transmission to a Samurai transfer case, and with Wagoneer axles front and rear and Bilstein coilovers. And the chassis was super heavy. I never built a tube chassis, so I overbuilt the crap out of it. And the chassis was like 675 pounds, and but the whole car was like 2,700 pounds. Everybody always thought it was like 2,000 pounds, but the chassis was just so heavy. So we went to that event, and we did okay at that event. I rolled on one of the major obstacles, and when I rolled, it broke the motor mounts on the motor. So that kind of set us back a little bit, but we finished the event and we did okay. But I think for the year, we were like fifth or sixth. I think we were sixth place for the year. So then the next season, the first event of the next year was your Lake Amador event, which we won that event. After that event, my spotter quit, and he wanted to go circle track racing, and he said we would never make any money in rock crawling. So he was going to go circle track racing. So then Lance had been doing so we had done a build for the El Dorado Police Department, El Dorado County Sheriff's Department. We built a 4Runner for them to use at Rubicon, which they never ended up actually being able to use. And it was kind of a weird deal, but Pirate had gotten all the parts donated for it, and then we did the labor of the build. Lance covered it on Pirate. And while he was there, he asked me if I was interested in having him make a website for me or something like that. And so while he was at the shop and we were talking about the website stuff, he asked if I had a spotter, and I wasn't really sure yet at that point. So I called him a week or so later and had him spot for me at the first ARCA rock crawling event of the year with the new rig. We won that event, and then that event was in Farmington. And then we went to Vernal, Utah, and we won Vernal, Utah. And then Cedar City, we had right before Cedar City, we had switched to a TerraFlex Terra 50 rear axle, which was kind of an oddball rear axle that they built for a little while. In Cedar City, I got it really bound up and it broke a rear axle shaft. So that kind of set us back, but we still placed pretty well there. It was, I don't know, top 3 in Cedar City. And then when we went to the final in Johnson Valley, it was really all about making sure we finished. As long as we finished in the top 5, we had the championship tied up. And so I think we ended up finishing 4th or 5th at that event. And we just kind of, took it easy the whole day and made sure not to break anything or tear anything up. And we ended up winning the ARCA championship that year, which is kind of crazy looking back now, because I think we were paid out more that year than anybody ever in rock crawling history. And total for the year, 4 events, was $64,000 is what we collected for the year. And then, and I think
I may cut the actual amount out so that you don't get revisited by the IRS.
Well, I claimed it.
Oh, you did? Okay, good.
Everything was paid in checks, so I claimed it all.
Oh, nice.
But yeah, I mean, it's kind of funny because I think that was pretty much Lance's job that year. Pretty much all he had going was the winning at the events. So, because it wasn't until after that Pirate 4x4 started really marketing a bunch of advertising and whatnot. But yeah, that year was fun. And then for the following year, at the end of that season was Supercrawl, which was the first time they did Supercrawl. We had competed once against Tiny at another event. I think it was the ARCA finals. I think Tiny was there, but wasn't doing real well yet. They hadn't had it
That was their
completely
first
figured out.
time out. Yeah.
Yeah. And then he showed up at Supercrawl, and I don't remember if he won Supercrawl or not, but I know that at that point I was like, okay, this car that we have right now is not going to compete with stuff like that. And so I wanted to build something new. So I had somebody make me an offer at Farmington, and I sold the car right there on the spot. And it was kind of wild because I sold the car and the trailer. The guy went down and bought a brand new Dodge at the dealership to tow it all home, but he didn't have the money to give me in cash right then and there. So Lance went with him, collected the money, and the guy paid for Lance to fly home afterwards.
Wow.
So I drove home from the event, no trailer, no car, and Lance rode with that guy to, I think, Tennessee, and hung out there for a couple of days and then flew home. It was kind of fun, a little bit different. So then I started building the Diablo ones. I really wasn't sure what I was going to build. And then Jason Shear came to me, and it was the first car I ever built for a customer as a buggy. I mean, we've been doing four-wheel drive stuff at the shop, but never built anybody a car from the ground up yet. And Jason came to me, and he had a bunch of ideas. He already kind of had a bunch of parts. And I was like, okay, well, we're just going to basically build two of these cars. I mean, he ran Dynatrack axles. We ran Terraflex axles. And I think he ran a different transmission than I ran. I think he ran a 3-speed Chrysler Auto, and I ran a 700 R4, but we both ran the little 3.7 Short Star V6 that was super rare. The 3.5s were the normal one, but Turnkey Engine Supply had a bunch of the 3.7s, so we bought two of those at the same time. And that was kind of a learning curve, because I think the total cost Jason was into that car was, I think, less than what he was able to sell it for, because I didn't know what to charge to build a car. So it was somewhat cheap. But back then, it's like, I was just thankful to be able to build somebody a car. And Jason was so awesome to work with. Jason's neat because he's always got, lots of customers always have good ideas, but Jason was so detail oriented that he wouldn't just have an idea on what he wanted the car to do, but he would have a really good idea what it was going to take to make that happen. And, which you don't see a lot in customers, and Jason's, just super good to work with. He's always positive, so but it made building the car, first car for us, fun, and it was different and fun. And him and I think Jeff drove the car and competed in one series, and Jason drove it and competed in the other. And we started the following season, which was the beginning of when ARCA basically got bought out by URock. And so we competed in your series, CalRocks, then, in that car. And then we competed in URock. And to be honest, the car did well, but again, it was a learning curve. And, back then it was triangulated 4-links were still kind of a normal thing. And, the car had a super low roll center, so it didn't side hill really well, even though the car was super light. My car was lighter than Jason's because Jason's car was mostly 120 wall chromoling, 1.5 inch, but my car, most of it, the upper cage was 120 wall, but everything else was 083 wall. So wow. My chassis was 275 pounds. So going from that 600 and something pound Suzuki chassis then to this was night and day difference. The car actually weighed less than the Suzuki, and it was almost, it was right about 300 horsepower. So it went totally different car to drive. It was a lot of fun to drive. I remember we did an event in Moab, Utah, and there was some little sand hills, and I was racing Mitch Guthrie in his LS powered Twisted Customs car, and we'd race up and down the hill, and the little V6 would friggin' hang with the LS pretty well, but so it was a fun car to drive. That car also we did back when Pirate and the Tin Benders did their trail challenge stuff. They did that race up backdoor, and I think we beat the fastest time by cutting it in half in that car. But the car wasn't built for that stuff. And it had 4 inches of up travel in the front, and maybe 5.5 in the rear. It
Just
freaking beat
beat
the
you.
crap out. Yeah.
So where did you go after that car?
So after I built that car, I had hired a new fab guy in the shop. And so the next set of cars that we built 4 cars all exactly, or 3 cars all exactly the same. And we built these little single seat cars, and we call them the Diablo 2, but they were a little single seat car. And it actually, kind of the sad thing with my Diablo 1 was I just pulled everything out of it and built a new chassis. And we built, panhard bar, front and rear, 3-link car with super high panhard mounts. So the roll centers, just super high, and, made the thing side hill. The thing would side hill until it would fall over on the sidewall of the tire, and then it still wouldn't roll over. It was pretty wild. But front engine, but those cars, I mean, they had a super low belly, and they hung up on the belly really bad. I was never really happy with that car that we built. It just never really seemed to, I don't know, it did good, but I rolled that car probably more than anything I've ever rolled. I think we did that event that you had that was down by right on the US Mexico border. What was
Yeah,
that
in
event
Boulevard.
called? Yeah,
Boulevard, California.
that event, I remember the first day, I think I rolled 8 times that day.
Wow.
And I mean, several times on the same obstacle, get the thing back on its wheels and I'd roll it again. It just, me and that car didn't get along real well. But we built.
Didn't Pete Mazzoni have one of those chassis?
Yep. So we built mine, Pete's, and we built one for Lance and Kelly as well.
Okay.
And a couple of them are still running around. I've seen them pop up here and there, and yeah, they're still out there kind of running around.
Cool. Then you decided at some point to stop the rock crawling. It was right about that time, wasn't it?
So basically, let me roll back a little bit. So
Okay.
in the first Suzuki in 2001, it would have been, at the end of the season, we picked up Summit Racing as a main sponsor. We went to the next season, and it was our first time on BFGs for 2002, and first full season with Summit, and we won the largest championship at the time. From that point on, we had a major sponsor all the way until 2005, basically. But in 2005, we had switched from BFG, unfortunately switched to Toyo. The end of 2005, I was kind of locked in a deal with Toyo. And if we competed in 2006, we had to stay on Toyo. And Toyo in 2005 came out with a sticky compound tire. Half the drivers got them, half the drivers didn't. And so we were on a DOT tire, and we could not compete. We went from never not finishing in the top 10 to not finishing any event in the top 20.
Wow.
And just by going from BFGs to Toyo. So after that, I kind of changed my rules on sponsorship. If you can't win on it, what good is it? And at the end of the season, we were locked in with Toyo if we competed. So I built a new moon buggy, built the car. The car was already on BFGs. I'd already planned on running the car, and Toyo came and said, no, we want you on Toyos for 2006. At that point, I said, no, we're not going to compete. I sold the car and built a Jeep Speed, and we were at the first Best in Desert race of the year for 2006. And a Jeep Speed, we built it over 30 days and kind of completely changed direction.
I was wondering why I didn't remember the Toyo portion, and I was wondering why all of a sudden it was just you were gone. I didn't know what the reason was.
And Toyo, I mean, our contracts, Toyo had done some kind of crappy stuff. I mean, Travis from Toyo had came to us at SEMA, made us this huge, ridiculously huge offer. And Lance was like, you're crazy if you don't take it. So we took it. And then they come to us and say, hey, look, we want to get a bunch of product and funding off the books before the end of the season. So we're going to send it over to you. And they sent us a temporary contract, which turned into a permanent contract that was nothing like what we originally talked about. So out
Shenanigans.
of, what was that?
I said shenanigans.
Yep. So out of that, I mean, originally we were supposed to get a bunch of tires. We ended up getting 2 sets of tires for almost 2 years. And yeah, it was not a good deal. But I mean, it kind of is what it is, live and learn, you know. So yeah, then we went to Jeep Speed. The first year in Jeep Speed, I don't remember where we placed for the year, but the end of the year, Lance actually had purchased the Jeep Speed, but the car was nowhere in shape to race something like the Baja 1000. But him and Camo came to me and they said, "Hey, you want to race the Baja 1000?" And it was about 30 days before the 1000, and I'm like, yeah. So he said, "Okay, you get the car ready. We'll cover everything else." So we got everything ready, and we went down and raced. We didn't pre-run anything. And we showed up, and there was Eric Flar. There was 1 or 2 other teams there, and then we ended up winning the 1000 the first year we did it, and it was a peninsula run. After that, I mean, it kind of, the next year we won a score championship, and then we won the 1000 3 years in a row in the Jeep Speed. We ended up for a total winning 3 score championships and 1 Best in Desert championship in Jeep Speed.
Nice. I can remember I was down there with you on some of those. Those were some good trips.
Yeah. They peninsula runs are fun. I mean, sometimes they're not fun while you're doing it. Sometimes you're asking yourself, why am I doing it? But peninsula runs are good. They you got to have a lot of grit to pull off a peninsula run.
True. Very true. Whether you're on the pit crew or in the car or the owner, whatever. I mean, Baja's no joke. You know, it's not the same as a Vegas to Reno race. Even though sometimes the mileages might be close, Baja is a completely different animal.
I don't know. Like right now, we're actually with our car, we're looking at next season and we're like, do we run a season of score or do we run a season of Best in Desert? And score is just such a bigger accomplishment. You know, there's so much more involved in it. But sometimes it's nice to do a series that's a lot easier, you know, and just, you know, everything's a little bit more black and white with doing a Best in Desert race. You know, it's easier to expect what you're going to get.
Yeah, there's no border crossings too. Things get different across the border. They really do.
Yeah, definitely.
Those that have done it, and a lot of our listeners have been down, you know, to Mexico to race. They understand what we're talking about. And then there's those people that have that dream of going down there and racing. And I always tell them, find a team to go with, you know, get on a crew, whether you're just driving somebody around or you're wrenching or, you know, you're a tire guy, whatever, but just get on a crew before you decide that that's what you want to do and see what it's like.
Yep.
You know, and because it makes a big difference. It really does.
So we raced the Jeep Speed from 2006 through 2010. The end of 2010, we sold the Jeep Speed and we ended up, a good friend of mine bought a Class 10 car and we ended up starting to race Class 10 in 2011. And then 2011, 2012, and 2013, we did, 2011, we ran Best in Desert and a little bit of score. And then 2012 and 2013, we ran score. 2013, I think, was a year that we ran score and HDRA. And in 2013, we got the Toyota Milestone Award for, you know, completing every race mile of every race. And then we also got third in the World Championship that was split between the 2 classes, or between the 2 series. So for score and HDRA. But yeah, that was a tough year, but a lot of races, because I think we actually did a couple of Best in Desert races that year as well. I think we did like 11 races that year.
Wow.
And then I think it was 2014. I 17 miles from the end of the Baja 1000, I parked the car in the rear of a trophy truck at 85 miles an hour.
Oh,
Trophy truck was stopped. I was chasing, it was like 1 o'clock in the morning. I was chasing them on our way to the finish of the race. We were currently in like fifth place. I knew sixth place was behind us. And so I was trying to get around this slower truck that, obviously he had had a bad day because we were catching him. We're on this long straightaway road, and me and my co-driver, Orlando, was actually co-driving, and I told him, I said, okay, let's get this guy on the straightaway. And we started reeling him in. We get it to where we're driving through the dust, and you get to that point where the dust will get so thick you'll lose the guy's amber lights in the dust, and you lose the lights in the dust, and you're just kind of staring at the GPS, and we're doing 85 miles an hour, and we come out of the dust, and I'm like, my first thought is, cool, we've caught him. And then I realized he's dead stopped. And he stopped kind of on the side of the road to let us go by. But when you're chasing a tail light, you can't tell that because you can't see where the road is. And we hit him probably still doing about 70, 74 miles an hour. And his rear differential was up against my steering wheel at one point in the crash.
holy shit.
Got on the brakes, and it basically, it bottomed the front suspension of the car when I got on the brakes, and we went under the rear bumper of the trophy truck. His rear bumper it bent the A-pillars on the race car. It cleaned the light bar off the roof. It ripped the shocks off the car, one of the shocks off the car. It ripped the steering rack out of the car, broke the tie rods. Throttle was stuck wide open on the car afterwards. And like when it all came to a stop, the dash was all smashed down and the steering wheel was all bent, but the two cars kind of blew apart. And after, they hit, compressed, and then blew apart. We're facing the wrong direction. The throttle's wide open. I'm covered in shock oil. I'm like stunned I'm alive. And I look over, and the trophy truck drives away, just drives away and leaves us there.
Wow.
And yeah, so I was pretty disappointed. I was mad, to say the least. Bondo had to yell at me and tell me to stop because I obviously wasn't going to catch him, and I was trying to, even though the car wasn't driving the direction I was trying to go. But we called our chase crew, and I thought we were done at that point. They brought us some parts, and we worked on the car for about 2 hours, and we got it to where we could drive about 10 miles an hour all the way to the finish line. And I remember we got to the finish line, and Roger Norman was standing there, and he looked at me, and he's like, what in the hell happened? The car was just wadded up.
But you finished.
We finished, and looking back, it's like not too many people have that kind of a story, that they hit a park trophy truck at 70 plus miles an hour, and one lived to tell about it. Two, they finished the race in a class 10 car of all things. I mean,
right.
That's a lightweight car to run into something that big and heavy.
Right. Was that the car that started off as like a 3 that against those Predators or whatever they were?
It was never a 3 car. It was built by the company that built those, because the 3 cars are shorter wheelbase, the 3000s.
All right.
But our car was originally built by Full Potential Motorsports, which our car was the very first Class 10 car that Score or Best in Desert allowed. Well, it was the first car that Best in Desert allowed to run an Ecotec. And they did it for a season before we bought it to see how it would compete against the other 10 cars. And then it became the thing, So in Score, we raced a car in Class 4 because the first in 2011 in Score, they hadn't quite separated the classes yet, or they hadn't quite let Ecotecs in Class 10 yet. So we raced Class 4, and then the next year, we went to Class 10 because everybody was going to Ecotecs.
Yeah, I didn't mean Class 3. I know Class 3 is the 4-wheel drive Broncos and Blazers and stuff, correct?
Yeah, but they have Class 3000, which is basically a short wheelbase Class 10 car.
Okay, all right. What are you doing now race-wise?
So after we wrecked the car, at that time, our main sponsor was a company called Transfer Case Express, which they sell transfer cases. And we were kind of trying to appeal to them a little bit more. So I said, you know what, when we rebuild the car, let's put a truck body on it. We'll put a V6 in it and we'll race in Class 7 Unlimited. So we did that. And the following year, Transfer Case Express dropped us and sponsored a King of the Hammers team. So that year we decided, screw it, we're not going to race. We waited. We raced the 50th Baja 1000 for the first time with the in Class 7 Unlimited. We ended up getting third, but we got bumped to fourth because we ran over a cone at a checkpoint at a half a mile an hour. Yeah. And super, super discouraging because the checkpoint worker said it was totally unsafe, but it was slower than walking speed. We ran the cone over. And it was at Coco's Corner, and there was a semi truck blocking the entrance to the checkpoint. And yeah, it was super frustrating. But anyway, so we got fourth place at that race. And then we didn't race the following year, which was 2018. And then last year we raced again, and in the big mud fest. Last year was the year that they got all the rain.
Right.
And
they had to delay the race. Isn't that the year they delayed it? Right.
Yeah, they delayed it 24 hours. And then but I mean, we're racing against, most of the cars in the class are basically, they're spec trophy trucks. Spec trophy truck allows you to run the Ford EcoBoost, the V6 EcoBoost, but the spec trophies aren't allowed to run 40-inch tires. Well, there's one of the trucks in the class is a spec trophy chassis with an EcoBoost, 40-inch tires and 4-inch Kings. I mean, it's, a legit truck. But then the other one is the Honda Ridgeline, which is another really legit truck. I mean, theirs is a Tisco spec trophy truck chassis with the twin turboed Honda V6 that makes a bunch of horsepower. I'd like to know how much horsepower, because I figure their truck's got to be about 6,000 pounds. And we started before them last year at the 1,000, and we were on a straightaway, and I knew he was going to catch us. Just our plan wasn't to be super aggressive in the hills of Ensenada. It's just super dangerous. So I usually like to wait until we get out of the Ensenada hills before we start pushing hard. And he caught me, and we were turning onto a straightaway. It was a good slow down 90-degree turn, and he was right on my rear bumper. And I'm like, okay, well, let's see, how fast his truck is, because our car's super light. I won't talk about how our car is literally like right at the legal limit of light, and it's 350 horsepower. His car's double the weight. I don't know how much horsepower they have, but I figured we would see, if he keeps up, then it's making a bunch of power. And I could not believe it. At about 100 miles an hour, I looked in my mirror and he was up against my quarter panel, and he was not giving up at all. So finally I was like, screw it. I let him go. About 40 miles later, I came around a corner. He's upside down in a ditch. So that kind of sucked for those guys. I figured they would get it back together and catch us. I mean, they flipped it back over, and I think they had some other issues and whatnot. But it's kind of fun racing against those guys in our little Class 10 car with a V6 in it.
That's
but
sweet.
Yeah. So we ended up we had a pretty good race. We battled with Dan Chamley up by Mike's Sky Ranch. Was probably the most fun racing I've had. He was super cool. Like, we caught him and he would move over and let us go. He wouldn't jackrabbit from me or whatnot. And we had passed him once. We spun out in a huge puddle and DB'd a tire and got a flat, and he passed us. And we get to the next BFG pit. He's in the pit. We're in the pit. We get out ahead of him. Then we get up by Mike's Sky Ranch, and it had just gotten dark, and I turned right down a road that was a left, and I'm stopped, and I'm trying to back out this road, and he goes by behind me. And it's funny because he actually stopped behind me and looked to see, because I'm sure he for a second was confused on which way to go as well. And so I back up, he takes off, and after that it was pretty much single track for a long time. So I was on him, and he wasn't really pushing hard, and then as it opened up, he started pushing harder and harder and harder. And next thing you know, we're coming into corners. I mean, and there's no dust because it's been so wet, and it's dark and whatnot. So the shadows work really well for being able to see. I like shadows because the bigger the shadow, the bigger the hole. And so we start chasing him really hard, and pretty soon he's coming out of corners and he's getting up on two wheels a little bit, and I mean, in that section it was kind of like a slot car versus a UPS truck. It's just it was really easy for us, and he was having to push really hard in the turns and whatnot. And he finally like kind of edged over to the right a little bit and let us go by him in some bushes and whatnot. And that was pretty hairy. It was about 100-mile-an-hour pass out through the bushes up by Mike's on, cliff roads and everything else. But then I drove it off a cliff. I came around a corner, and it was a blind turn. I couldn't see where the turn straightened up, and I straightened up too soon and drove down off a big embankment. I stopped there, and my co-driver gets out, Gordon Brown. He gets out, and he's trying to get trucks to pull us out, and nobody will pull us back onto the road. And we're nosed off the road. We have one tire that's still like above the bank, but I can't get out of the car. The car's literally tottering back and forth. And if I get out of the car take my foot off the brake, the car's just going to roll down the hill. So Gordon comes back over, and he's like, "What do you want to do?" And I'm like, "Well, walk down in front of me a little ways and tell me what it looks like." And because I can see cars driving by ahead of us, they're going down the road, making a 180 left, and it's a switchback road. They're making a 180 left and driving down below us. And Gordon comes back, and he's like, "Well, it's just cactuses and trees." I said, "Okay, well, I'm going to go." And he's like, "What do you mean?" And I was like, "I'm just going to roll to the bottom." And he's like, are you crazy? I'm like, "Well, kind of, back in the competition rock crawling days, there's many a times when you plan a rollover." And I was like, "And I'm planning on rolling over right now." So he's like, no, we got to do something else. So we sent a message to one of our chase guys with our satellite tracker, and he was at Mike's. So he starts coming to get us. And then we finally before he got there, we finally got a spec trophy truck that we had passed to pull us out. And I don't remember their number, but I mean, it took like 5 full throttled yanks to get us all the way back up on the road.
Wow.
And at that point, once we got moving, we got notice that we were about 35 miles behind Chamley. So we were in second place, about 35 miles down. And when I got out at the road going up to Mike's at the highway there at the BFG pit, which was about it was about 50, it was probably 75 miles actually from where we were. We had actually made up everything but about 15 minutes.
Wow. Very
but
good.
Then Adam got in the car, and he did the San Felipe loop. But the problem was our car tops out at like 105, and I'm watching Chamley on the tracker, and he's doing quite a bit faster than that. I mean, it was at one point, I think I looked, and it was like 112. And I know Adam didn't push our car right to the 105 because he didn't want to sit on the rev limiter on the lake bed. And then in the San Felipe whoops, also we had nothing for Chamley. His truck having, probably close to 30 inches of rear wheel travel, and our car being, 19. It just doesn't do well in the San Felipe whoop. So he completely ran away from us until the end of the San Felipe section. And then we finally were able to get back by him. And then from that point, John pretty much just cruised to the finish. I think we finished with like a 30 or 40 minute lead.
That's pretty good. That's pretty good.
It was a good race.
Yeah. Awesome. And so you won that one.
Yep.
Cool. 2000, and that's 2020. Or
Yes.
2000? Okay, that was 2020.
2000,
Go ahead, say it again.
2019.
2019. So what's happened in 2020? Have you raced at all?
So we prepped the car and we paid for our San Felipe entry, and then COVID hit and they canceled San Felipe, and then we were going to do the 500, but it kept getting pushed back and kept getting pushed back. So I was like, let's just wait and we'll do the 1,000. So then we actually went out and we did shock tuning, a bunch of other stuff to get ready for the 1,000. And then Adam on our team, him and his crew is such a huge part of the team, and he isn't able to go. He can't leave the country because of COVID right now. So they're on a no travel restriction, being in the military.
And that's Adam Arsenault.
Yes. Yeah. So I kind of thought about it a little bit, and we were already short one driver. So then to have Adam not be able to go would put us 2 drivers down. And I'm like, you know what? I mean, I have a couple of people that would love to drive, but they were, when I talked to them, they were nervous about it, not ever really getting a lot of seat time in the car. And I'm like, we don't have the pressure of a sponsor right now. And I would rather go feeling like I have a chance at winning than go worrying about, something bad happening with the car, or, just, the team, or so on and so forth. So I'm like, you know what, we'll just wait until 2021, and, hopefully we can run a whole season in 2021.
Yeah, we're all hoping that. So what else is going on? Anything
Well,
else?
I mean, you want some history on the shop?
Yeah, absolutely.
So, I mean, that's kind of enough about me, but the shop, so we opened the shop in 98.
Right.
Kind of ironic. My first job, I still remember today, Dodge Neon oil pan gasket. But anyway, so we opened the shop in 98, and, I thought moving to Carson City, opening a shop up there would be awesome, closer to Rubicon, lots of BLM land, so on. But the reality was there was very few local people that were into off-roading. There was a small group of local guys, and, there was some shops and stuff in Reno and people out there that, but they weren't going to travel to Carson to have work done. So in the beginning, it was pretty difficult. We started out doing a lot of service work and just regular automotive work. And then at one point, I bought a bunch of exhaust machine equipment, and, we rented the unit next to ours and opened a exhaust shop, and we were doing exhaust stuff. And then, about the time that we got into the competition rock crawling stuff, things started kind of getting a little bit better after we won the championship. I remember I was at an event, and I was like, okay, at this point we need to hire somebody to do online sales and just kind of, focus on that. And we used to sell a fair amount on, doing online sales, and we had, a decent crew that's basically what they worked on. And then as things grew, 2001, 2002, I had been doing basically all the fab work prior to that. Well, I shouldn't say all of it. A good friend of mine, Dave, kind of helped me start the shop, and he was pretty decent with fab work. So he had done a lot of it, but he had moved back to the Bay Area, and I needed to find somebody. So actually your son recommended somebody. I was at Lance Clifford's house up in Georgetown, and no. Wait, no, you're right. So your son had recommended Jesse. It was Camo that recommended Bender. So first it was Bender. That was kind of interesting. I didn't know anything about Rob. I didn't spend a whole lot of time on Pirate 4x4 at that point. I mean, I spent time on there, but not really caring who the other characters were. I didn't really get caught up in I mean, I would go on there and lurk and look at cool pictures of cool builds, but I didn't really spend much time, on there per se. So anyways, yeah, I hired Rob. He at the time lived in Ridgecrest. He ended up moving moving up there and actually moved in with me and lived with me for, I think, most of the time that he worked for me. He was interesting. I was always amazed at like just how much he knew and how, how good he was at pulling something out of nothing. I mean, you could come up with an idea and he would have a part made, in a very short amount of time afterwards. And at one point, the crew we had was, I mean, I kind of feel like I've always been kind of lucky on the crew we've had, but at one point with Rob there, I mean, we had Rob, Nick Sosha, Kat, Jeremy, which we called Jerb. We had quite a few really good guys that were good guys in the industry that really knew what they were doing. And I mean, it was fun. It was fun building rigs with them because most of the guys were doing it because they had a love for the sport, and which worked really good with, at the sport at that point in time didn't support, the $100,000 builds that you would see today to build, a full rig, so most of the rigs we were building were cheap built rigs, not saying the parts were cheap, but we just didn't charge a lot, to build them for compared to the hours that we had into them. But most of the guys, I mean, they love the sport. Most of them, if they weren't at the shop working, they were out wheeling or out of rock crawling comp. Rob worked there for, I don't know, I think he was there for, it had to be close to a couple of years. Rob worked there he was after Jason's car was done. And then we did the 3 Diablo 2s while Rob worked there. He built all the chassis at the same time. That was kind of an interesting time too, because we built 3 Diablo 2s from tubing on a rack to a running driving car. And we built Bob Stanage a stock mod car. And we built Josh Bureau a stock mod car. And we did 5 cars in 5 weeks.
Wow.
And Lance documented the whole thing on Pirate. And at the end, I think everybody in the shop hated each other, and it was a lot of long hours. But yeah, it was a lot of work. I don't really miss those long hours that we used to do back then. And it kind of that kind of screwed me up, because after that, going down the road, it was like I always looked at we could get so much done in such a little amount of time that it made scheduling stuff from there on forward. I was terrible at it. Maybe I was always terrible at it, but I always think that we can get stuff done faster than we actually can. But yeah, I mean, those times were fun building all those rigs at the same time. And then we built Bob Stanage's moon buggy, and we built myself one at the same time. And they were both Subaru powered rather than Volkswagen powered or Ecotech like most of the guys were doing. Bob's actually got out and competed a bunch. Mine was sold and went to Mexico, brand new. It was, it never ended up actually getting, we never competed in it here. Bob's car was a little bit goofy though. It didn't climb as well as most of the cars we built. I think once Blue Torch had put an LS in it, took the Subaru out, and there's a few videos of it doing backflips with the LS in it. But
oh yes. Isn't that the one that Doc Mercer ended up with?
Yeah, didn't it? I think it burnt to the ground, didn't it, at King Hammers or something?
Yeah. And that was after he rolled it at some of the Eastern events that we had after Bob owned it. Yeah, it was almost a Christine car. You didn't know what it was going to do to you.
Yeah, I mean, there was that video online that Bob Stanage hated, but it was that it did a backflip 180 and landed on its wheels, and then he was knocked out and it ran over a couple other rigs or something. But yeah, there was
Indiana, Portland, Indiana.
Yep. Yeah. So then I don't know, once all that stuff kind of slowed down, we pretty much, once I sold my car, we weren't really getting requests to build cars too often. And then I got a really strange, so Rob had left, And I was looking for somebody again, and that's actually when your kid recommended Jesse Haynes. And Jesse kind of went back and forth. He was going to go to work for Blue Torch, and then I talked to him some, and then he talked to Rob Park about going to work for Blue Torch to see what his thoughts on it were. And Jesse finally was like, I think Jesse wanted to move out west to be where the West rock crawling scene was. He's another one of those guys that's always just kind of done it for the love of the sport. And so it was, for him, it was never about money. It was always, he wanted to wheel, the hammers and, in the Sierras and be able to compete and do, basically do his sport and so on. And so right about the time that Jesse came to work for me, I got a phone call from Bill Kuntz from Torchmate, and total unexpected. He calls me and he says, hey, I want to build a car to compete for next year. What would you build? What would you suggest? And we kind of laid out what I thought. I thought the unlimited class for me, I was like, I don't think it's going to be the more popular class right now. So I would build, a pro mod car. And he's like, okay, that's good. And he was talking to one other shop and wanted to know what I thought about them building it. I was like, well, I mean, yeah, I can't badmouth another shop, but at the same time, it's like the proof is in the wins. And so he ended up having us build a car, and that was the most expensive car we built. And it wasn't expensive on the labor side of it. It was just, he wanted the best of everything as far as component wise. And it was cool because we got to do one of the 60-degree steering Spider-Trax axles, and the thing would just do crazy stuff because of how sharp it would turn. And then we did, an LS3 in it, and power glide with a big converter, and the diffs were offset, the motor and everything was in the car sideways, but yet it was still a 2-seater car. And that was a fun build. That car, when we got all done, was actually, so halfway through the build, I got suckered into spotting for Bill. He knew I wasn't competing anymore, but I was doing the desert racing stuff. So he asked if I wanted to spot for him, and I was like, sure. And we went down to Paradise, to the event down there. I don't remember if it was your event or whose event it was. Not Paradise. Was it Paradise?
It's Oroville.
No, the first event we went to.
Oh, Browns Valley.
It was in Southern California.
Ricky Johnson's Park. We just talked about that place with Randall Davis because he was one of our judges with Losi or with Axial.
And that's where Jason Shearer drag raced Paris.
Yes.
Yeah. So that's where Jason Shearer drag raced the car in the parking lot.
And the guy was pissed.
So we went there, and Bill told me basically the day before the comp that he had no rock crawling experience. He'd done a little bit of trail wheeling, but not even like Rubicon level. And I'm like, I'm going to die. This guy's going to run me over for sure. So that event was interesting. We didn't do really good, but we finished the event. The car was somewhat still in one piece, but I think it was on its lid at least once or twice at that event. And that whole first season was pretty rough. And then Bill talked me into doing it another season. And the second season, we ended up getting second place in the car. I don't know if it was second place or first place. I'll have to look at my
trophies. I don't remember.
But that was fun. And then Bill came to me and wanted to do a desert race program. So we found an old Gary Turner Class 7 Unlimited truck that Kurt Leduc had originally built. It was a FabTech Class 7 truck. And it was in a bunch of videos and so on, and won a bunch of championships. And it had the SBO, the 4.5 V6, 550 horse, super cool truck, but it was a frame rail truck. So It struggled in Best in the Desert against the two chassis trucks, mainly because the front didn't have enough wheel travel. They just couldn't get the front to cycle enough around the frame. But we helped Bill with that program. I didn't drive or co-drive. I co-drove once for Bill in my Jeep Speed, and that ended up with a barrel roll of sort, nose to tail, actually, I should say. After that, I didn't want to co-drive in something with 550 horsepower. I was scared. No, it was fun. That's Bill ended up getting Brad Lovell to co-drive, which was good because Brad's super level-headed. He stays pretty mellow, not too much gets him riled up. So we started prepping that truck, and they raced that truck for a couple seasons in Best in the Desert, and they raced a couple score races as well with it. And we at one point, half of our shop was just prepping their cars, their Rockcrawler and their race truck. And we had two guys that's all they did was work on their stuff. And then Bill's sister started competing in the Rockcrawler, and kept that going while Bill and his buddy Greg raced the Class 7 truck. And then late 2008, I get a phone call from Lance, and Lance is like, "Hey, I went on the scariest ride of my life with Jason Shear." He's like, he put bypass air shocks on his Rockcrawler, and we went out playing at the Hammers to see if he can race it in King of the Hammers. And Lance is like, "It does not work well." So Jason called me and asked me if I wanted to redo the back half of the car, or redo the car and make it work better. And it was a Campbell car that they built on Pirate. They built the car. The majority of the car was done in like a week, but it was very similar to the other cars that Shannon and his brother and those guys were building at that time. And it was a Rockcrawler. It wasn't really built to be a go fast King of the Hammers car. So we basically just brought it to the shop, and we cut the roof off, but we only cut the roof off because Jason Berger didn't fit in the car. So we cut the roof off to raise the roof, and then we redid the whole back half of the car, converted it to trailing arms with coilovers and bypasses, still used the same axle housings and so on. The only thing we ever really did to the front was we put hydraulic bump stops on the front. And that car was evil. I think it was like 650 horsepower, and it was like 2,600 pounds. It was definitely a friggin' very evil car. And we did the rear of it. We had to do the car a 3-link because the rear diff was offset with a high pinion. So to do a 4-link, the upper link would have to go right through the drive shaft. So doing a 3-link, we were a wishbone 3-link, not a track bar. We were able to put a crazy bend in the wishbone to make it clear the drive shaft. And it occasionally would break. I think he broke 2 wishbones in the car over the 2 or 3 seasons that he ran. 3 seasons, I think he raced that car. And then, but right after we got it done, like in the middle of building it, we were racing the Baja 1000 in 2008. And so Jesse, which at this time had left Shaffer Off-Road and was working for Torchmate, Jesse came in and he built a lot of the rear suspension stuff while I was gone doing the race. And then another guy, Cat, had done a new upper link mount in the front. We had to move the upper link mount because at full stuff, it would hit the harmonic balancer. And we get the car all together. Jason goes out to run it, and it rips the upper link mount off the diff. And at like race speed, like serious speed in the desert. Folds up the coilovers, just makes a mess out of everything in the front. And Jason calls me super calm. I'm sure he was not happy, but super just Jason, and he's like, "Hey, this is a problem. This is what we did. What do you think? Can you help me get it fixed?" And I'm like, "Sure." So I sent my guy that at that time, my main guy that worked for me. I'm like, "Look, go down, stay at Jason's house for the week and help him get this car fixed so, he can make King of the Hammers." And they got it fixed and got it all back together. And then literally the car was done like a week or 2 before King of the Hammers in 2009. And then Jason went on to win King of the Hammers 2009 with the car. After that, I had a really hard time with King of the Hammers. Dave Cole originally invited me to do it the first year. And I said no. And mainly I said no because I've always been kind of just one sport, one focus. And with doing the desert race stuff, I didn't have a car that I could go down there and play in. So I said no because I didn't have anything to go out and have fun and compete in. And or they weren't even really competing the first year. It was more just a for fun thing. And then after we built Jason's car, or rebuilt the Campbell car into what it was, I really wanted to race King of the Hammers really bad. But I looked at it and I'm like, I seen the progression of the sport. One, I didn't know if the sport could get there, because to grow to be where the cars are today really takes a lot, and it was all new. I was like, I just don't know if the sport, seeing rock crawling and how much it fell off for a long time. I was like, I don't know that King of the Hammers will be able to make that. And two, I looked at the cars and I knew that the cars were going to be like, they're like computers or phones. They're outdated by the time you get it done. And and so in 2010, I was super lucky, and Lance hooked up a deal with Dave Cole to race Dave Cole's IFS King of the Hammers car in Class 1 at the Baja 1000.
And I remember.
Talk about, there was so many things that were against that car ever making it to the race, and so many people put in so much work. But the car, I think it was in October at the women's race, the MDR race or whatever, the car was rolled, and the car had caught on fire and almost burnt to the ground. And then they sent it up to Pacific Fab. Pacific Fab went in and rewired the car. I went up and helped work on it for one night. Jeff Mello went and helped work on it. All these guys were, super hard trying to get this thing together. And Lance had kind of put together this whole crew and of guys that were going to drive the car and chase and everything. And the car, they got the car done. I think it was new motor that Pacific Fab had supplied. They get the car to the 1000, and I remember they're driving it on the beach a day or so before the race, and the car keeps stumbling and so on. So Jeff has me go drive it. Jeff's in the passenger seat, and he's like, they're trying to figure out what this running issue is. And I go and make a pass down the beach, and as soon as you throw it in a corner, it stumbles and dies. And Jeff just looks at me, and I'm like, yep, it's out of gas. And they've been chasing this running issue all day. So we go back and they fill the thing up. We take the thing to tech, and the car was overweight. And they knew the car was overweight prior to going down south. So they lightened the car up as much as they could. It was overweight for the cage tech. They did everything they could to get this car underweight. And it ended up still being, I don't know, it's probably 50 pounds overweight when they scaled it. And Jesse Combs was in the car at tech, and she just smiled at Bill Savage, and he's like, okay, screw it, you guys can go. And so it worked out good having her in the car through tech. And so then we lined the car up 18th off the line in Class 1. And back then, you had a different number for every race unless you were like the champion. So the car was 118, so we were 18th off the line. We're 18th off the line, and not too many people have co-drove with me, but one thing at the 1000, I like to catch the guys that start ahead of me, but I like to take it easy in the beginning. The hills in Ensenada are super dangerous, just the locals, and it gets so silty and dusty. So, I felt like I was running a pretty conservative pace. I just, the car didn't like the whoops at all. So anytime you get it, so I had asked Dave right before the race. I said, have you ever raced a car in four-wheel drive? And he said, no. Well, we had raced the Jeep Speed in four-wheel drive. We kind of drove the car like it was a rally car. You back it into the corner and you use the throttle like you're driving a jet boat, basically. And wherever the front tires are pointed is where it goes, and you just stand on the gas. So I left the starting line at the 1,000, and I'd never driven this car before other than driving it down the beach for less than a minute. I leave the starting line, and I'm instantly on the starting line. I was like, wow, that's different. It just lit all four tires right off the starting line. And throw it in the first turn, and and we start going, and next thing you know, I mean, we're coming out of the wash, and I'm catching the Class 1 car that started ahead of me. And I get around him, and then we catch that Yokohama all-wheel drive Class 1 car. The guys, I think they're from Japan or something like that. I caught him in the Ensenada Hills, and he refused to let me by. And we were in a super narrow little single track spot, and it was really rough up and down. And I moved in to give him a bump, and next thing I know, I think I was all the way up on I know my front tires were on top of his rear tires. I was really up on top of the back of them. And I wasn't trying to, it wasn't a speed difference as much as it was an elevation difference as we were going through the rough. And, he moved over, and next thing you know, we got to Ojos, and I think we had moved up to like sixth place. And then going through the Ojos rollers, I was racing Cody Parkhouse, and like side by side through the Ojos rollers. And I couldn't, coming in the Ojos rollers, they have those couple S turns, and coming out of one of the S turns, we came into it nose to tail, and I just slingshotted around them and was gone. And but then there's a few really whooped out spots that the car didn't like. So I really quickly learned I had to click it in two-wheel drive in the whoops, because otherwise the car just was violent. And once you did that, it was a little bit better. But we kind of settled in. We got around a bunch of cars, and we kind of settled in, and we just started cruising. And then at race mile 97, the right front, we were coming around a corner, and I hit the brakes. I tapped the brake a little bit, and the brake pedal pulsed and like pushed back on my foot. And I'm like, well, that's weird. And I'm kind of like, looking around to see what's going on. And right at that moment, the right front wheel came off the car with the caliper and everything else still attached to it. And it sheared the front, the wheels, the spindle. Basically, it was the unibearing, and the unibearing, it looked kind of like the old Dodge Power Wagon, kind of used them, the all-wheel drive Dodge unibearings from like the 70s. But it basically broke the unibearing flange where the wheel bolts do, right off the unibearing. And, the wheel, everything took off. I came sliding to a stop, and it's just about not quite dark yet. So we, kind of crazy. We could not get a hold of anyone on our team via radio or phone. And I pulled my phone out, and I had cell phone service, but I couldn't get a hold of anybody. So I actually posted pictures on Pirate, and that's how everybody on the team found out. Was because I had posted pictures on Pirate. And so Scott Watkins had came in with his chase truck and welded the spindle back on, and we were hoping just to get it to the road. And we knew we had a spare, but we didn't know what chase truck it was in. Well, we went not very far at all, and the spindle came off again. So I ratcheted it was the right front wheel that came off. I ratchet strapped the right front corner all the way compressed with a ratchet strap that Scott Watkins had. And then I put a block under the right rear in between the bump stop and the housing. And then I ratchet strapped the left rear all the way down. And it basically lifted the right front up. And one thing I'll definitely give, I think it was Ron Kirby that built that car.
Right.
Is with that all done, the car was set up, it basically was sitting level. And if you got out of the gas too quick, it would dive over and stuff that A-arm into the ground. But if you stayed on the gas, like we got to the highway, and we had a couple other chase trucks meet us at the highway. And where we get to the highway, we're going down to the next BFG pit, and which is actually BFG pit 1. And I'm going down the highway, and the chase truck behind me calls me on the radio. And, back then it was a 60-mile-an-hour speed limit on the highway. And he calls me on the radio, and he's all, "Hey, Mike, I'm a little bit worried you're doing 70. And I was like, I'm not really worried about getting a speed penalty because we're so far down right now. And he said, "No, I'm more worried because you got 3 wheels and you're doing 70. But the car drove, you couldn't tell that unless you got on the brakes, you couldn't tell that it was missing a wheel. It drove so straight and had 0 bump steer that the thing worked friggin' awesome. And then we get to the BFG pit. We sit there and wait for a couple hours trying to figure out who's got the spare spindle. And then we finally figure out that it was we didn't figure out until after the race that it was in the back of Jeff Mello's truck, which was on the opposite coast.
Yeah, we were sitting at Coco's, the entrance to Coco's off of Highway 1 when we discovered that that's where it was at.
So then we're, I don't know, 150 miles outside of Ensenada. And it was that night, it was like one of the coldest nights I've ever felt in Baja. So I'm like, okay, well, I got to drive this thing back to town. I'm not going to sit and wait for a trailer. So I started driving it back to town, and there was a couple sketchy spots where, some of that road going, coming from basically Mike Sky Ranch towards Ensenada, that road's got some cliff turns that are left-hand turns. And I remember coming into one and realizing, okay, I'm way too hot. And I come into this corner, and I as I start to turn left, it dives the front A-arm into the ground, and I don't want to drag the A-arm on the car, and just tear the A-arms off the car. So I remember downshifting and just pitching the car sideways all the way around the turn so it would keep that A-arm up in the air.
With 3 wheels.
You went 3 wheels. And then I get all the way to Ensenada, and we're in the middle of town, and I pass 2 cops, and as I look over, they're looking at me just shaking their head as I drive by. But
that's Mexico.
Yeah, that was a fun. I wish that I would have gotten an opportunity to race that car again. I think that car had huge potential. They raced it a bunch, but it just I was shocked at how well that car did. And and this is 2010, so the year before, Jason Shearer had won King of the Hammers in his car, and this is 2010, and I'm like, okay, I know that I cannot build. I feel like I could build a car to compete in King of the Hammers even today, but it takes a lot. It takes a lot to compete at King of the Hammers, a lot more than just a good car.
Correct.
But the financial part of it, I couldn't justify. I like racing in Baja so much that I couldn't justify building a car I know there's a whole series behind King of the Hammers, but for me, King of the Hammers is really the only race that I would care about doing. So I'm like, I can't justify spending that kind of money to do one race. I just wasn't interested enough in doing the other races. But still, it's like, I didn't go to King of the Hammers in 2011, and then I went in 12. And I hate going because when I go, I want to build a car. I just I go and I want to compete, but I just know I can't, And even if I had the best car out there, these guys are so good, and you watch, all of them, but Tom Ways and Jason and Lauren and Nick Nelson, all those guys are just so friggin' so good, that to beat these guys, it's like you really have to have a perfect car, a perfect day, and the perfect crew. It's just everything has to work out perfect. And it's a lot of the same as racing in Baja. There's so much more. You go to a Best in Desert race, and I don't know, I can't really put down one series versus another, but some races are very black and white. You show up, you race, everybody goes to their designated pit, and it is what it is. But there's so many unexpected things that happen in a race like King of the Hammers or racing in Baja. King of the Hammers has designated pits, but there's still, you could pre-run something 10 times at King of the Hammers, and then you get there and there was a bottleneck there and the whole course has changed,
True.
And now you're winching a spot that you thought you were just going to rip right through. it takes somebody that can really adapt to the situation to do well at a race like that.
Absolutely. And did you watch the live coverage or pay attention to the race in 2000 this year 2020? It was a phenomenal race. I think it was the best race KOH that there ever was. Most of the time I'm at the races or paying attention to what's going on, but that race had so many lead changes, and whoever was out in front, something always happened, something's minor even, or a rollover or whatever, and all of a sudden they were out.
Yeah.
And the amount of lead changes, the live coverage was phenomenal. That this next year is going to be really intriguing to see what happens. I really do.
Yeah. And though it blows me away at Dave Cole and his crew have done an amazing job with putting together the live coverage. And I mean, it's insane. It's like, it's amazing that Dave has reshaped motorsports in some degree with having live coverage at an event that is this remote. And while there's still other events that are a lot easier to do coverage at that don't have as good a coverage, it's crazy how well the live coverage is done at that event.
He has brought in the right people to do the right things, and he has these harebrained ideas, and he'll call somebody up and says, "This is what I want to do. Can we make this happen?" Not knowing if the technology is there, or what do we need technology wise, and he's willing to risk it all to make things happen.
To some degree, that's kind of what it takes, though. I mean,
yeah, it does.
Dave definitely. Dave's one of those guys. I think he doesn't care if you like him or you hate him. He's going to do him, and and there's something to be said for that. Yeah. So finish up the shop real quick. So 2010, we moved the shop from. So my wife and I had a daughter in 2009, and then we wanted to be closer to family. So in 2010, we moved the shop from Carson City back to the Bay Area. And originally, I had no plans on moving the shop. Originally, my plans were I was going to go get a job working in a dealership and basically close the shop. And then a few phone calls later, a good friend of actually Jason Shear reached out to me, Ben Ratto, and said, "Hey, we got this shop. It's pretty much turnkey with equipment. It was their personal hobby shop, their personal family hot rod shop." So I literally moved from Nevada on a Friday, and I was working at that shop on Monday and rearranging it. And before I even moved, I already had a couple months worth of work lined up. So we moved the shop down. I used their shop for a couple of years, and then we moved. That shop was actually just on the outskirts of Oakland, and then we moved our shop into Alameda, and then we moved in with a guy that had a water jet shop, and basically we leased half of his shop. And then we've moved a couple times since then. Now we're at a shipyard, which has its pluses and minuses. The nice thing is it's super secure. They have 24-hour security locked complex because they work on military boats and stuff. So you don't pretty much have to worry about anything. And but at the same time, it's a shipyard, so it looks like a shipyard. A lot of customers are like, "Am I in the right place?" But and then when we moved from Carson City to the Bay Area, kind of backwards from what most people want to do, we stopped pretty much doing like online sales, and there was only so much I could take on when I moved the shop. So it was one of the things that I didn't really decide that I wanted to deal with. And we basically just focused on just doing work. And we built a few rigs since we moved, but it's kind of funny. Dave from Poly Performance one day gave me kind of a lecture about building rigs and making money building rigs and whatnot. And it actually kind of sank in, and it's changed kind of what we do. I mean, we have half the shop right now is dedicated to fab work, but we're not taking fab appointments. I mean, I probably still have a year's backlog of fab work sitting here. And then the other half of the shop is dedicated basically to gears, suspension installs, stuff that's in and out. And that's kind of, we're looking at probably moving into a different spot next year. It'll be probably about 3 times bigger than where we're at. And I'm hoping at that point we won't have any major fab. I'd like to, if we're going to do fab work, I'd like to just have one fab project. And when that fab project's done, bring in another one. It's kind of funny because years ago, Bob Rogie actually worked for me for a while. And that was one of his big things. He says, why don't we wait to bring in another project until the one before it leaves? And it's hard when you're scheduling stuff. But when you get to the point where that's not where you're making your money, it's easy to put together a waiting list, and you kind of build what you want. And that's kind of where I'm at. I'm like, if I'm going to do fab work, either I want to do it on my own stuff, or I want to build just what we want, and that's it. Not do everything that comes in the door.
Right.
So that's kind of the direction we've gone. I mean, I have an old school Jeepster build that's going to be super high end build that we're doing right now. And then I got a CJ5 that's going to race Nora that we're building. It's kind of like it's very similar to kind of the same setup that we did on Jason Shear's old King of the Hammers car. Some of the same, like the trailing arms are very similar and so on. And, 9-inch housings front and rear. But that one's kind of cool because he's running a big 426-inch stroker AMC motor, like 700 horsepower, and it's a 99-inch wheelbase. Whoa. Or 95-inch wheelbase. It's going to be a handful. But 2-inch chromoly cage, so it'll be all good when shit goes bad.
That's a lot of horsepower for a short wheelbase.
Oh yeah. It should get with the program though. It'll be fun.
Through the cattle guards.
Yeah. Yeah.
Sideways. Yep.
Yeah. So then, I got a pretty decent crew here. I mean, I've been lucky to have Rob and Jesse work for me over the years, and a bunch of other really good fab guys. And then here I call them kids because they all call me old man. It's funny because most of the guys that work for me are younger than my shop is old. And I remember being, 25 years old and people telling me that they weren't going to let me work on their toy because I was younger than they were back when I opened the shop. And now I'm 47 and like, it's crazy that, still doing the same stuff. But I got one fab guy he's like all of them, they're all the best if you ask them, but in their own right mind, they are, because they all have their own style and they all bring something different. But so I got one good fab guy right now. And then I got one kid that works for me that it's amazing at how much work he can crank out the door when he is motivated and wants to. But he's like I was when I was his age. He's friggin' playing with everything with wheels. So it's keeping him motivated is the hard part. Yeah. And then I got another guy that I hired that's a guy, Julio, that does all our gear installs and motor work and stuff. And he's another one that's pretty good at what he does. So the crew right now works pretty well together.
Awesome. Glad to hear that. So I've kept you now almost 2 hours. And I'd like to say thank you so much for coming on and sharing your history and what you're doing. And this episode is actually going to air this Thursday, and I'm going to go right into editing when we get off the phone. I want to say over the years, you've always been really honest with me. Through our friendship and everything, and I've helped you on the race team at times, being part of the crew, mainly the guy on the radio. And I remember one time you told me, yeah, I like you and only you to talk to me on the radio because you're calming. You don't sound panicked when you're on the radio. And that always cracked me up because I always felt panicked. Where are you at? But, I want to thank you for giving me the opportunity to go to Mexico with you and always being honest. I remember back in the early days of Cal Rocks, you were like, oh, you got to do things differently. And then, when all the dust settled and I'm the only promoter out there and you come back and you go, you know what? Look back on it. I think you were doing it your way, which worked out better because you're still doing it. So kudos to you. And I really appreciated that, Mike. So thank you for your friendship. Thank you for competing with us and being a big part of our life, my life, and my family's life. And I hope to be able to get down to Mexico someday with you guys again and have some fun.
Yeah, definitely.
And,
Definitely.
Go ahead.
I miss hanging out with you guys. It's funny because I don't know. I can't bring myself to build a rig to compete in rock crawling again, but I've looked at it a few times and I've been like, man, those cars are so much simpler than some of the stuff we build now, But yeah, I miss the technical part of the sport, That's really what I liked. It's even in the desert racing, I usually like the tight technical sections and the rocky sections because it's kind of I don't know, I feel like it's more of a challenge than just to get on a lake bed and lay it down,
Right.
Granted, getting on a lake bed and laying it down, takes a lot of nerve, but at the same time, running twice as fast as your nearest competitor through a rock garden, you got
pretty satisfying.
You got to be able to keep the car together, But
Yep.
but yeah, I miss you guys. You definitely need to get you out there and get you back out there with us and working the radio again and so on.
Yeah, now I'm actually set up for it. I don't take the Cherokee, those kind of places. We got a Raptor and got 110 watt radios and everything, and much better prepared than I used to be. We'll get together and we'll do it someday. We'll make it happen.
Definitely. Yeah. We got a peninsula run coming up in about a year from now. So
that might be a good one. That's something to shoot for. Sounds good to me. All
okay.
right. All right, Mike, I want to say thank you very much. And I'll let you know exactly when this thing loads and airs. It'll be Thursday morning. So, maybe you can help share it and everything and say hello to the family, and we'll see you next time around.
Okay. Awesome. Thank you.
All right. Thank you.
Have a good night.
You too. If you enjoy these podcasts, please give us a rating. Share some feedback with us via Facebook or Instagram, and share our link among your friends who might be like-minded. Well, that brings this episode to an end. Hope you enjoyed it. We'll catch you next week with Conversations with Big Rich. Thank you very much.